حنتشرف بأنه يرأس جلسة وهو حيقدم المتحدثين، وحتكون الجلسة ونتمنى التوفيق لسعادة الدكتور نايف والمتحدثين. تفضل طعمه.
Let us start with Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. First of all, we would like to welcome you in the second day of the workshop of the Prince Maqrren bin Abdulaziz Chair, Crisis Management and Disaster, in cooperation with the International Emergency Management Society, which is held in King Abdulaziz University. We have for this second session four distinguished speakers. Start with Andrea Zenon, Mr. Martin Martin and Christopher Chiesa, but he's not here today, and will deliver it Professor Amr al-Faqi for his speech, and then Professor Goshen Q. If we are ready, we're going to start with the first speaker, Mr. Andrea Zenon. Mr. Andrea Zenon will speak about disaster risk management, trends in the Gulf, cooperation Council countries, with special emphasis in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Mr. Zenon is the Middle East and North Africa Disaster Risk Management Regional Coordinator in the World Bank Group. Mr. Zenon also, he has a bachelor and master degree in linguistics and history from Bologna University and Granada University, and he has also another master's degree in economic and international development from George Washington University. Andrea, the floor is for you. If you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naif, and thank you everyone for having me. I'd like to thank King Abdulaziz University and Times for inviting the World Bank to participate today. I'm going to keep my presentations fairly short, and I do want to recognize all the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's partners that are in the room, starting from the PME, civil defense, and different ministries that are working with the World Bank to develop the first national risk assessment. My name again is Andrea, and I will cover these 4 points, go quickly over the resilience program of the World Bank. I'm not going to focus on terminology, so I'll keep it as simple as possible. Look at the hazards, natural hazards in the MENA region, and spend a little time on the World Bank accomplishments in the recent years, and maybe suggest a few steps for the future. Just an overview of the World Bank working disaster risk management. This is a fairly new program. Was started in 2006. In 2010, we had about 28 investments for a total amount of $2 billion, and in 2014, we have $4.5 billion, and this is all managed by 200 experts working across 6 regions. This represents about 5% of the World Bank total project budget. A little bit of statistics on disaster events in MENA. And I should say these statistics underestimate the real impact but they come from the MDAT database. About 50 million people affected, close to $50 billion in economic cost, and approximately 400 events, large-scale event registered. This is important to point out. A lot of the events don't get assessed, measured, and documented. So we failed, for example, in the Middle East and North Africa to collect enough information on the drought damage and losses, which are often very significant. If we look at the trend of natural events globally, they've doubled globally. In the Middle East and North Africa, in the last 30 years, it tripled. There is an increased trend that indicates that small events are on the increase. In Saudi Arabia, this is also the case. Riyadh, Jeddah are increasingly affected by small-scale flash floods. I'm not talking about just the 2009 and 2011, large-scale, but also smaller events. And the databases that we're looking often don't capture this data. A recent example in Morocco, which was fairly large-scale, but didn't result in the death of many deaths, is not captured by this event either. A few data points in the context of development, urbanization, and this is a high and concerning topic for all of us and for the decision maker. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is among the most urbanized country in the world. Right now, we're, according to MOMRA, the kingdom is 80% urbanized, expected to be 88% urbanized by 2025. The Middle East in general is one of the most urbanized regions in the world. Close to 63% of the population lives in urban setting, with a lot of new informal housing and settlement being created. 92%, which is very unique of MENA, 92% of the total population occupies 3% of the region's surface. And 60 million people, approximately 20% of the population, live in coastal areas. The coastal areas population is estimated to double in the next 15 years. And informal settlements often represent 50% of the population in cities, from Sana'a to Casablanca to Djibouteville to Greater Cairo. More than 50% of people live in cities, and this is a big concern also for the kingdom. We are currently working on finalizing a resilience strategy in the city of Mecca, and the discussions with the authority indicates that a large part of the city, which could be up to 50%, are informal. And with the informality of these new investments and houses, we are creating a new vulnerability and potential future losses and damages. A bit of an overview on the main hazards in MENA, which are floods, earthquake, drought, and sand and dust storms. Floods, the percentage of GDP exposed to floods tripled, as previously indicated, from the 70s to 2010. Earthquake, while not a high probability event, represents 24% of total disasters in the region over the past 30 years. Sand and dust storm are increasingly causing disruption to health, traffic control, as well as the energy industry, particularly in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And drought, according to our databases, about 40 million people in the region have been affected since 1970. I think it's very important to state that droughts, which is, a slow onset disaster, kills many more people than what we're saying. There are no formal damage and loss assessment done for droughts. Actually, the first one ever performed were in 2011, which were done in the Horn of Africa. So again, lack of reporting mechanism and a lack of data for these very destructive hazard, which affects the kingdom and many other countries in the region. A few data here, a little data on damage and losses to give you a bit of a perspective. While I know this is not official data, I'm still going to use some of the information taken from newspaper and from our assessment. Starting from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the floods in 2011 caused at least an estimated $1 billion in damage and losses in the city, even though this is suspected to be an underestimate of the real impacts. In Morocco, in 2004, sorry, almost 1% of the GDP impacted. In Djibouti is not in the map here, but it's an important example because it's where, for the first time, it's in the Horn of Africa. It's the first country where a drought post-disaster assessment was performed in 2011, and I led that effort, and we concluded that the drought caused about 4% of GDP contractions every year from 2008 to 2011. That's a huge amount of money. The Yemen floods of 2008, which hit Hadramaut and Al-Mahara, is particularly important because more than 1% of GDP were caused by the torrential flood. I want to talk for a minute about the Morocco experience because I think it's very important for countries that moved quickly from an emergency response culture to a proactive risk mitigation efforts, which we are also applying to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in our efforts with the PME and the Civil Defense, CAXT and all other partners. A major event struck the Kingdom of Morocco in 2008. They contacted the World Bank and the UN and the EU partners. We helped them develop a rapid risk profiling, a qualitative assessment, identifying where the risks were, mapping the institutional setup, which is often very fragmented with decision-making which is not well coordinated, and finally coming up with a recommendation for a more advanced risk assessment. The risk assessment was done in 2009 with not just with the Ministry of Environment, the Civil Defense, but with the Ministry of Finance sort of coordinating all the efforts. And that's why Morocco today, when we talk about risk management, it has a system of coordinated decision makers under the chairmanship of the Ministry of Finance, which is resulting in resilience investment. Morocco is the first country in the world to develop a resilience fund, so that when you think about building a new shopping mall, a new street, a new port, you ensure the risk information is properly factored into the development process. We're trying to follow the same approach in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with whom we've been working since 2009, thanks to the leadership of the PME, as I said, the Civil Defense, CAXT, SGS, Ministry of Finance, Health. We just presented the first draft of the risk assessment. When I say the first in the GCC, is the first national level, and it's been led by Dr. Naif, which I thank for his leadership and for continuing to push this agenda. I think since the first time we worked together in 2009, the dialogue has shifted tremendously from a response base to a much more proactive mitigation focus. So I'm very proud to be part of this team, and I want to stress this risk assessment is led by the Saudis people, not by the World Bank, not by the UN. I also want to acknowledge one of my team members, which is from Saudi Arabia, Gadir Ashram, who's in the audience, as well as Carl Taylor, who's our senior expert, who's responsible for the risk management as it applies to the health sector. The next phase of our engagement with the Kingdom aims to look at the strategic aspects. How do you develop a resilient strategy, and how do you integrate this risk information and more comprehensive risk assessment into decision making? I want to show this slide because it's while it's not, the map is not the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is one of the outputs of the risk assessment that the PME is leading, which is to have a digital platform where all risk information, all the reports, all the toolkits that have been discussed here today, all the terminology, all the resources are available to the decision maker on your phone, on your application, and it would be a secure platform, but that basically enables all ministries to learn from past events and have access to this information to inform emergency response, to inform any type of risk activity. And this is particularly important because when you produce a report, unless you make it consumable to everybody, from the civil defense practitioner to the students to the people that are affected, then you lose a big opportunity. And this will be, of course, ownership of the kingdom, and we'll be proud to help develop that. Again, one of my first slides, I talked about what we built at the World Bank since 2006, and we've experienced a rapid shift from emergency response, which is essential to building a resilient society and economy, but it's not sufficient, and it has to be accompanied by I call it disaster risk management, meaning like an integrated approach, which includes emergency response, preparedness, proactive mitigation, relief, and so forth, and hopefully leads to a long-term resilience. And while the Middle East and North Africa is still a small program for us, we have about $750 million invested in across 11 countries. We started in 2007 with 2 countries. Now we have 11 involved, and we've done risk assessment in Morocco, in Yemen, in Djibouti, in Algeria. We're doing it in Lebanon, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as well, which is one of the pioneers, and we have requests from other 5 countries. And most importantly, these countries are identifying, developing a resilient strategy as one of the key next step in their development. And when I talk about resilience, people ask me, okay, define resilience. What does that mean? Is it only resilience to natural hazard or natural disasters, even though this is probably not the best way to call disasters? And I generally define resilience as the ability of a country or a community or a company to absorb and bounce back after a shock or an event happened. However, if we look at and discuss resilience in the Middle East and North Africa, we're not just talking about floods, sandstorm. Today we're talking about pandemics. I'm actually going to Lebanon after this, and we're talking about refugees management. Other countries are contacting us because they want cybersecurity support. So I think the Middle East and North Africa is unique because of its unique risk profile, and I'm very excited to be part of this broader team to discuss how we can help to build a more resilient economy and societies. A couple of ideas which I've already hinted at how to build a more resilient countries. Developed this digital platforms that I showed before to avoid having a lot of data, a lot of risk assessments, a lot of expensive reports that are not used by the people and by the ultimate stakeholders. And this is why the integrated risk management that we propose and we have completed in many countries includes a risk assessment, the capacity building, the training, the partnership with the university, and absolutely the integration of all type of stakeholders. One of the activity that I wanted to refer to that we are pioneering, I know this morning there were questions about women involvement in risk management, The Middle East is the first region to pilot a competition between cities to promote women entrepreneurs. And instead of having reports writing, why don't we think about the risk of cities that we have to develop companies, to develop startups. So there is this competition currently ongoing, and we're targeting 100 cities. The kingdom is currently not involved, but hopefully in the future it will. And the final thought, again, I wanted to leave you with is that proactive risk management does include many of the things we discussed this morning, from the risk management, the risk assessment, the education programs, the advocacy, but it also includes developing resilient strategy, resilient funds, and we're looking forward to the opportunity of showcasing what the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is doing in the MENA region and internationally to really raise the standards of resilience economy and resilience investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. I think it is far away. I mean, we have plenty of time to questions and answer. If there is any questions for Andrea, please. Yes. Can I get the microphone from here, please?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would like to give my appreciation to the speaker. The lecture was beautiful, and thank you for it. And as we all know, that risk assessment is very important. And before you make any plan, or any plan will not succeed unless it's covered all the risk expected. And what I heard is beautiful, and we are very grateful for what the National Bank has been associated with some civil defense and other concerned government department, Saudis. And as you just mentioned, that the first phase of the plan is finished now. What is the next stages? I would like to please some details about the next stage and what we need for the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that important question and for your appreciation. And let me correct myself. When I mentioned that the first phase of the assessment is completed, the first draft is completed and will be shared with all the national authorities and ministries, hopefully by next week. I would like to also congratulate the Kingdom. 2 weeks ago, no, actually a month ago, we presented the first draft, which, and I can insist on this point, it's done by the Kingdom. It's not done by the World Bank. And it's presented 18 ministries were together for 2 days to discuss how to convert risk assessment, a preliminary risk assessment, into risk for decision making. So that was an extraordinary achievement. What is the next phase? Very important question, and I think to answer the question is, how do we use this preliminary qualitative assessment? Well, our first suggestion, and I said, this needs to be done by the Kingdom, is of course to go more in depth. When I engage with, from the civil defense, to the Ministry of, to MOMRA, to health, everybody has important data that is currently not integrated into the assessment. So the first step would be also, let's try to make this first assessment a national priority and bring it under one database. The digital platform that I referred to before becomes the one-stop shop for the Kingdom decision maker and for the citizens to have access to risk. And for the first time, we're looking at only 4 hazards: floods, a seismic sandstorm, and volcanoes. But we should be more ambitious as we go to the second phase. Looks into the probabilistic aspect of the assessment,
as well as looking more at the institutional setup to ensure that decision-making is better done, and investments take into account risk information. Two other things that we can recommend right now is that the assessment is accompanied by a national strategy on resilience, and it's a broader resilience, not just a natural hazard. It could be also the biological, it could be the health, it could be as it relates to the key sectors, energy, tourism, etc., etc. The capacity building aspect, that's never enough. We know that the Kingdom is, as we speak, establishing the first national disaster risk management center. So helping the Kingdom establish that center and have it fully run and effective will be another important priority. And finally, perhaps also follow some of the examples of other Islamic countries like Morocco or like Indonesia, which are already moved away from the risk assessment. They do risk assessment all the time because it's not just once done, we're finished. Khalas, no, we need to continue building on it. And they're already thinking about resilience investments so that they have a centralized system which literally you have different ministries that will apply to this fund with a call for proposal, for example, to develop a new housing. And that fund responsibility is to assess the viability of this investment, ensure the risk assessment information and feasibility studies are fully integrated into this way forward. I think if we go beyond the usual risk assessment, we can definitely help the Kingdom become more competitive and more resilient.
Thank you. There is another question up there.
There is no question here, thank you.
Thank you. Down there. Any question?
Excuse me? Sorry, there is one question.
Okay.
With regard to urbanization, do you have any kind of impacts, that examples for the urbanization problems, that the more increasing urbanization problems? Do you have any country experience to share?
Can you please repeat the question? If I had more examples on the urbanization.
For example, you mentioned 85% of the KSA is going to be urbanized by 2025. What are the impacts that you see in other countries due to this urbanization?
Thank you. That's a very good question. MOMRA indicates that by 2025, the Kingdom will be 88% urbanized, and as such, one of the most urbanized countries in the world. Often with new, rapid, unregulated urbanizations, more vulnerability is built. Let me give you concrete examples from Lebanon, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, which are 4 countries where I'm working with. Simply, new buildings are developed without building code standards. In many cases, there's no regulations followed, or there are no regulations to follow, and not enforcement of this regulation. Let me give you a specific example of a country where a shopping center has been built without a drainage system. This is a perfect example of a disaster, a natural disaster. You know, it's corruption that is leading to a rapid investment. And how can you have a shopping mall without drainage system? So now the World Bank is actually helping this country to retrofit this shopping mall to ensure that if a flood, if rain falls, there is appropriate drainage system. So again, many cities in the Middle East and North Africa have more than 50% of their population living in housing which are not disaster-proofed, that have not taken into account the risk assessment information, or they are built in floodplains, or they are built in wadis. You know, in some of the countries, we see new neighborhoods being developed in bodies, which we know sooner or later will be hit by a flash flood. And it's costing the cities millions of dollars. Unfortunately, this cost often is not documented, it's not communicated, and therefore it's a lost opportunity and to do better in the future.
Thank you, Doctor. There is another question here. You've stated that the female have an impact and they're participating, right? The member here would like to know what kind of participation are they involved in the Middle East?
Thank you. I refer to this program, which is called We Resilient Cities. It's Women Resilient Cities. It's really an effort to move away from report and analysis to maybe more action. And the Middle East, it's a region with tremendous entrepreneur talent, particularly among women. Women often are leaders of communities and schools and health. So we had received requests from different cities. We started with 3 countries, which is Lebanon, 3 cities, sorry, Beirut, Cairo, and Djibouti, to propose business solutions that address risks in their cities. So we're running these competitions, and women leaders will submit a proposal to develop a startup in their communities, and there is a competition. This is the first phase only. The finalists will receive training, mentorship, and funding. It's a package, and it's not just done by the World Bank, but it's done with the World Bank, with the private sector, and the business school, Georgetown University, and IE Business School, to bring this startup to market and to produce wealth while reducing risk. The Gadir, the person I referred to, which is in the audience, is our focal point for women entrepreneurs, and you can talk to her, or you can ask more questions, and we'll be happy to share the website so that you can know more about the second phase, which targets 100 cities, which will start in September.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to get the man right, because the women, they take it right. Okay, and now we'll stop the questions now, and we are looking for the second speakers today. It's Lieutenant Martin Thomas. He's a lieutenant in the Ministry of Defense, Danish Emergency Management Agency, chair of the board of the Sahana Software Foundation, and he will talk about disaster management, capacity building for disaster preparedness. Lieutenant, floor is for you. Yeah.
First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk at this workshop. It's an honor for me to be here. My name is Martin Thomsen. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel within the Danish Emergency Management Agency, yes, but I'm talking to you today in the capacity of being chairman of Sahana Software Foundation. So my background is I'm a practitioner. I'm humble here to be among scholars and academians who study this in a more deeper way than I practice it, you could say. What I've been doing for 33 years now, being a 54-old man, is traveling out to emergency, whether they are national, from the Kingdom of Denmark, where I come from, a little kingdom. We're only 5.4 million Danish people. So we also respond to international disasters. Apart from taking part in EU monitor missions to Siberia, Omsk, minus 45 degrees, very cold, even for a Dane. I have been so fortunate to be working with the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo for almost a year, where I was heading the Department of Civil Security and Emergency Preparedness. After that, I was so fortunate to be able to join the UN, OCHA, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, where I had my first mission to Sri Lanka in the aftermath of the 2004 tsunami. And actually, in Sri Lanka, dealing with the issues of the tsunami was the first time I met with Sahana. I'll come back to that. After that, after I ended that mission, I was back in Denmark, where I was acting school director at our staff college. We merged 3 colleges, and today I'm now the deputy principal of our Seoul college in the Danish Emergency Management Agency. Apart from responding to Sri Lanka, I've also been involved in the mission to Albania, Tirana, the flooding in Albania. I was a special advisor for a fact-finding mission to Nairobi, and last year I was the head of mission to the flooding in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where Denmark was one out of 19 EU member states that responded. So that's my background. If you look on disasters, today we talk about, well, we put them up in 4 boxes, but we talk about the 5 phases of emergency management. We say prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And what is characteristic, you could say, looking at the disaster risk management cycle, is that for many states, the incident is the spark of their emergency services, is the spark of their response to disasters. And when you have had these severe incidents, then you start to rethink what could we have done better. To build a little on experience here, when we were engaging in the 2004 tsunami in Sri Lanka, they did not at that time have a Center for National Operations. I understand you are about to enhance yours in Saudi Arabia. So the immediate thing to do, the obvious thing to do, was actually to set up a Center for National Operations and to invite all the key institutions to be part of this center, to be able to do a holistic approach to struggle to battle all the problems that was faced in the aftermath of the tsunami. Not reinventing the wheel. I've just put up here a lot of names where you can see that response is one of them, but actually community planning should be something that goes ahead before that. Community planning, looking into risks and vulnerability. And working on these topics, working on these items, you should then end up with having standard operational procedures to be able for you to respond more efficiently to disasters wherever they would occur. And even when you have these standard operational guidelines, you should be able to look into contingency planning. While we were, for example, while we were facing the tsunami, well, the aftermath of the tsunami in 2004, there was a hurricane that was going towards Sri Lanka at the same time as we were responding to the disaster. So suddenly working with the aftermath of the tsunami, we were faced with a threat that a hurricane was now going to cross Sri Lanka, creating new problems. So even when you have standard operational procedures, you should be able to do contingency planning and to amend them into your plans. I'm just going to set the ground here for actually presenting Sahana software, the Sahana disaster management software. So I'm going to introduce the risk and vulnerability analysis model for you. It's a model that's been developed by DEMA, the Danish Emergency Management Agency, and it's a quick one. It's something that you actually should be able to conduct with it, let's say, more or less an hour. Looking on the RVA model, you could say that on the one side you have the threats, and on the other side you have the targets. So without going to promote any kind of cheese, where we look into this cheese, these slices of cheese here, a threat can slip through the holes even though you have set up systems, and that would then be seen as a threat. Looking into the different vulnerabilities and looking into the different capabilities that you have should then give you a ground for setting up plans to mitigate the situation. So what is the RVA model? It's a method for analyzing risks and vulnerability in a systematic way. Why carry it out? Well, risk and vulnerability analysis ensures that our preparedness efforts focus and that the threats we face. Who should carry it out? Well, risks and vulnerabilities should be analyzed by those actors who are responsible for society's critical functions. So actually here we are talking cross-sectorial. It should be all functions within the society. And then again, as I mentioned before, how quick can you do it? Well, ideally we say that you can conduct it within an hour. Therefore we call it the RVA 60. Just show you here a spreadsheet of different threats and hazards that you could tick off the boxes. The previous speaker talked about a database. Well, this is an example of some of the topics that could be in a database like this. The thing you would do then is to identify the critical functions and activities that must be continued. And as I mentioned also during disruptive challenges. Do a risk analysis, do a vulnerability analysis. Looking at step one, well, I kind of felt that the best preparedness for my speak was done yesterday. Identification of critical functions. When I was traveling with 3 other colleagues to this conference, we ended up in a Lufthansa flight going to Jeddah. When 3 minutes after we took off, the whole cabin was filled up with smoke. So we actually had to return to Frankfurt. But this is looking at threats in quite another way though. Looking at the critical functions, I just put up a picture here of an airport. It could actually be a power plant also. So you'll have to look into what critical functions you have in society. Different threats and hazards. We've seen today already the weather conditions, the changing weather conditions, as some of the threats and hazards that we will have to encounter in the near future. I've been taking part in a study about the Arctic Pole, the melting of the Arctic Pole, and the new threats or risks that this will cause society, because having the possibility to suddenly be able to sail there with cruise ships, well, if you can, people do. But how do you respond to a threat in these environments? Step 3, look into your risks. I hope you can see. Yes, you can see. It says, well, it doesn't say oil spill. It should have said oil spill. Heat wave, fuel blockades, ice winter, vandalism. You actually tick in the boxes. How highly probable are they, and how critical do you think they will be for your society? And this goes for your society. Then looking into vulnerabilities, those that we just found, look at them before the incident, during the incident, and after the incident. Are they inadequate? Are there deficiencies? Are they acceptable? Then carrying it on further to look at the major changes that are needed within prevention here, fuel blockade, for example, or heat wave as another example. Training and exercises should be something that you should look into. Well, I think it's important here to say that RVA 60 is only an introduction to risk and vulnerability. RVA 60 is not a substitute for more elaborate methods. It's a quick and dirty way to do a risk and vulnerability analysis. SAHANA encourages public and private organizations to use the RVA model, as it provides a stronger basis when working with crisis management and business continuity planning. That goes, of course, for those countries who do not do this already in another way. Coming back to the data bank that was emphasized earlier, I have with me the reference, if you are interested, to look into a possible scenario bank where you can get ideas of what could be possible threats, just to be inspired. But as you can see, the RVA 60 model takes you through responsibility threats assessment and to make up a risk profile, and then for you to be able to set up proposals to mitigate that. The database I just introduced then gives different scenarios that you can look into and comes up with different answers how to overcome them. You can then further on assess the consequences, and you'll have a risk matrix, and then with this vulnerability overview you have a possible to assess the different levels that you have to look into. So, the feedback from the users have been very positive. DEMA has introduced this in the Balkans, former Eastern European countries where this was needed. So I think I can talk very positive about it. The results are intended to set up your response plan, to set up prevention programs and investments, to do training programs, and to exercise the different scenarios that you have come up with. And then again to evaluate and re-evaluate, and then adjust and amend your contingency plans. So, how does the international society meet the evolving emergencies? What means have been established to bridge the gap between needs and resources? INSRAC, the UN body, has developed the virtual OSOC. OSOC is the abbreviation for On-Site Operations and Coordination Center. So this is what the response entities work with. The virtual OSOC is for the response entities to coordinate their combined efforts. Looks something like this. So if you already have a profile, you can go in there, log in there, and you can see what disasters are actually there. I took this clip and on the 11th of March and at that time the tropical cyclone Palm was set up as an emergency. Then you can go under the different layers and you can then start the coordination. I'll not go deeper into this, but just state that it is the response entities that use this platform. But saying that, and coming back to what I was saying earlier, we actually should look at the emergency as more as just when it happens. So after the emergency, you have the recovery phase where you are some UN organizations, for example, set up different programs, and even countries, of course, would set up their own programs to battle with the situation. And that's where Sahana Software Foundation comes in with our disaster management software. So, quoting Avilioni Cruz, no innovation matters more than that which saves life. The Sahana open source disaster management platform was, you could say, invented in 2004 by scholars in Sri Lanka, Colombo. It was the IT community there that saw a possibility to respond, for them to respond and for them to support the Sri Lankan government. At that time I was advisor together with a colleague as part of an UNDAC team, United Nations Disaster Assessment and Coordination team, to President Kumaratunga to support her staff in the situation. One of my colleagues, Joe Bishop, got the idea of setting up the Center for National Operation, and 3 days after I joined him for him to be able to succeed setting up this center. One day, a young man came into the Center for National Operation wearing a sweatshirt and in sneakers. I was in my black suit, white shirt and tie, looking neat. I was in the presidential secretariat, and then this young man comes in. Well, at that time I already figured out if he was able to get in there, he might know someone, and he did. He was a professor at Colombo University, Dr. Sanjeeva Verivarana, and he came up to me and he said, after we have been properly introduced, he said, I can read in the papers that the UN is not being able to encounter the situation, to battle the situation. Well, could I say yes? Could I say no? So I just answered, uh-huh. Then he said, I got an idea. And then he came up with the idea of setting up an IT system that could help to support this situation. I don't know what my colleagues, I see my uniformed colleagues sitting there, we have our systems. We train our systems. We are happy with our systems. And if someone comes up and tells you, I have another system, we are not happy. Would you actually change your system in the middle of a crisis? Well, the question here was we didn't actually have a system. If he could come up with a system that was able to work, then we actually would like to look at it. The organization behind this was universities, but it was also Dr. Sanjeeva, who at that time also was working together with IBM. So on one side you had all the corporates, and the other side you had universities spread around the world. It was originated, as I mentioned, in Sri Lanka, and it has then since been deployed in over 25 countries, and has been used by many different organizations, including Red Cross, the UN, and national and local governments. So, this was the picture of the Digital Center for National Operation homepage that was set up. And as you can see to your right-hand side, there was a Sahana organization registry, request management system, a people's register, a camp register, and assistance database. I'm pretty sure you will remember all the pictures of people that were put up on fences where people, well, just imagine the number of deaths, 240,000 deaths, and all the thousands of lost people. So people were putting up pictures on the fences to be able to find their relatives. Sahana came up with the idea of setting up a system where you could actually do this digitally. So while you were typing in the names and all the data in the system, it would start to correlate the data towards the database. You could even take a picture and scan the picture, and then it would come up with a suggestion to whom it could be. That was before Picasa. A situational map of shelters by population. Here you see a picture of all the places that Sahana has been deployed. I should mention though that deployment is not Sahana, is not us going out. That is the community taking responsibility. And Dr. Raker actually said that earlier this morning, that you should not underemphasize the community empowerment. Because when disasters happen, the community wants to take part. You see that also using social media. That is one of the newer challenges. We also have to look into how to incorporate social media. So how do we then help? We set up a directory of organizations, offices, and people to support communication and coordination. Apart from incident management, sharing real-time information, we actually invite everyone to come in. If you remember, I said the virtual OSOC was for those who responded to disasters. But this system here invites every one of you to take part, the whole society, not only the institutions, but also the companies in the country. We have the following modules that can be deployed as needed. Organizations, set up an organization system, human resources, projects in the aftermath, demographic data, assessments, working with risks, messaging between the different stakeholders, having incidents, warehouses, shelters, different assets and requests and donations organized through it. So it's massive. And far more than I can encounter here, I can see. So, I need to rush, I'm sorry. But looking at mapping, you are of course already aware of the different systems, how they work, so I'll just quickly scroll through this. Identifying where the great needs are. Multi-stakeholder authorization, as I mentioned. one of the things that you can just that I would see as a problem in the beginning was, for example, when you work with an institution like the police, they are quite they're quite strict when you actually are drawing things out of their systems. But it is possible also within the different security systems. Just quick examples on where it has been utilized. So the background of the system, the backbone you could say, is the same. So how you use it and how you amend it to your country or to your system is totally up to you. As I mentioned, it's not Sahana that does it. It's for example, your own community that in many countries it's university students that take it as a project. Then they work this out. Or you can, of course, contact us, as it is the case after the Hurricane Katrina. New York, state of New York, contacted us and said whether we could build a system for them, and then we built a system, and then they had Hurricane Sandy. Now the system works for them. I think I should end here, otherwise I'll be thrown off the scene and join my colleagues at the table. So thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and I think with this very useful and interesting information that he delivered to us here, I'll take 2 questions, if there is any question. Down there, I don't see any. Up. There is any question up there?
Yes, there is.
Actually, it is not a question. I would like to share the experience of MN, where they created a database which World Bank also knows. This database is created with the civil defense to do the vulnerability assessment and also to make the decisions where to provide the resources and also where the allocation of funds should be made. This is one database which created a lot of enthusiasm among the various stakeholders, including the civil communities and also civil interior ministry and all. And they were widely using this one. As you know, the war started and the work was discontinued. This is one experience. In India, after the tsunami, we developed a state resource center with the various funding agencies supported, and the United Nations, they developed this resource center where any information, for example, if the communities are not getting any funding, if there is any kind of disaster-prone activities are not happening in the areas, all this information was created in one place, and people, when they want to allocate money, for example, any agency which they want to provide funds, they will come to this resource center to make a decision based on the data available with the resource center. I thought to share this information with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. One of the things actually that I would like to comment on saying this is that I actually mentioned that when you have a system that you have exercised with and you are comfortable with using, you should stick to that. It's not a question of reinventing the wheel. When I talk about Sahana, I always say that Sahana is a possibility to create a platform that can make different institutions talk together. So dragging on information from World Bank or from different national stakeholders is for sure one of the possibilities. I talk too much, so I didn't have the opportunity to show you a little 5 minutes video clip, and I can't see you. But if you approach me, I will give you the link to the video, and we can share the experience then of how they how they are building a new system in California that is built on the society taking responsibility as a whole.
Thank you. And actually, I'm very interested in that video to see.
Oh, you will
Okay.
watch the video
So,
together.
if there is another question or comment, so Andrea.
Very quick comment. Just to thank the comment about Yemen and of course for the great presentation, and also openly speak about one of the challenges, which is my presentation. I said $750 million went on risk reduction investment, and often in many countries we created, in partnership with the countries, as requested by the country, very complex studies, very data-intensive reports that very few people, including in Yemen, could use. And I think our guest that asked the question had a very good point. The stakeholders in this case, which were not just the Ministry of Defense or Oil, the community, was the school, they were very proud of this very simple, it was a very simple digital place, similar to what Sahana has presented, which everybody could relate to. Culturally, it was a place where people would go and read the news, a place where you could today even see the Twitter, see the Facebook.
Community empowerment.
Exactly. So it's very powerful, and it's not that expensive. You know, again, back to the risk assessment question. Often the risk assessment costs $1 million, $2 million, but then with $100,000, you can build in a system that enables people to communicate. So again, I want to hear more about this.
Thank you very much. Well, Sahana is a free and open software system. So go to our wiki and you can find it there. And then for those of you who have the interest to support, please do. We'll be happy to talk further on with you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I think now we're going to the third things we have here. It is from Christopher Shiza, but unfortunately Christopher, he cannot come to Saudi because there is difficulties in visa. And then we have Professor Hamro Muhammad Al-Faqih. He will present and then Dr. Christopher's speech. Dr. Christopher actually, and I'll just say something about him because he's not available. So he's specialized in he's specialized in application of, my classes have a problem with it, but this is specialized in application of geospatial information, science and technology, and disaster risk reduction, and natural resource management activities. Dr. Amro is professor in Faculty of Meteorology and Environment, Department of Hydrology and Water Resources. It's floor for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm going to, maybe this presentation will be a little bit more technical, so I will try to, simplify somehow. And also I think because we are running out of time, so I will go quickly through something that might be not so interested for you, but at least to give you an idea about the engineering point of view for flood hazards assessment. So this is an application of random walk theory. I will explain that later on. For simulation of flood hazards, and we have a case study about Jeddah flood 25th of November 2009, and it was actually on Hajj time. But Alhamdulillah, on Hajj there was no problem. The problem was mainly in Jeddah here. So I do this work with my colleague Dr. Jarbo Bahrawi. We are really involved in this flood analysis and hydrology aspects since about maybe 5 years, because this is actually our main task in our department. Outline of my presentation, so I will show you first some images of the 25th November 2009 storm event, and then I will explain the objective of this presentation or this research work. I will give you a brief review of hydrodynamic models for urban flood simulation, so how water goes in cities and try to make these cities drowned, how this is happening. So I will show about some basic models for that. And then we are proposing in this study, we are proposing a new model, proposing this urban flooding model concept. I will explain that, and then at the end I will give some simulation of urban flooding, some model results, and then I come up with some conclusions. So this is actually some images of the 25th November 2009 flood, actually at the KU campus. So you can see here, this is actually the entrance gate for our faculty of Meteorology, Environment and Arid Land Agriculture, and you can see the water. The water depth is about 50 meters. This is of course after the event, maybe the second day. And you can see also it's all full of water. Also the main street, this Abdullah Sulaiman Street, which was all full of water. So that's, it was actually vacation time. At that time, the university was in vacation because it was the Hajj vacation. So not many people was available in the campus. So it was good for that, there was no, loss of life in the campus. But of course, in other places, there was really problems. So this is also some, satellite image about, maybe I can show it here. This is actually the campus. This is the university campus, part of it, of course. This is the main street, Abdullah Sulaiman, which I show you this water. This water is just on that main street. And this is also the residential area on the other side of the street. So the flood was actually coming from this side, and it crosses the highway, and it enters the university, and also the streets and all these buildings here. So this is actually the image before the flood, and this is the image after the flood. So you can see, of course, this is image after the flood, a couple of days after the water was evaporated, and also, was drained from the area. But you can notice what you can notice from this. The sediments that comes with the flood, there was very fine sediments, comes with the flood, and these sediments are deposited over the streets and buildings and all so you can see the picture was sand, maybe full of sand in these areas with respect to the original one, which was like that. So then our objective of this study is to develop a flood modeling technique that has some kind of features. And these features are that they are conceptually simple, numerically stable, and efficient in terms of computer cost. So I should maybe give a little bit of idea about, there are of course many models available in the literature that you can use for flood simulation. But these models has some, some drawbacks. For instance, they are, they need they need storage of data, and they also need kind of high-speed computers to run big models. And also they sometimes run to unstable results, so you can get some unrealistic results. So we are. Another thing also that about the environment. So we have here an arid environments, and the type of flooding is flash floods. So it has a specific characteristics. While in other areas where the other models are built, they have rivers and they have special types of modeling that can be deals with rivers. So in our environment here, we don't have rivers, but we have wadis. And these wadis have different characteristics than rivers. So we have to take that into account. So that's why we started to think about developing our own software or own modeling techniques that can handle such things. So after we have developed that one, but of course still in the beginning, so I will explain that later on. And we have some simulation with preliminary simulation with the model at that stage. So to start to give you a little bit an idea about these hydrodynamic models that use for this flooding, so I have this image. I mean, this is one of the famous software which is called Mike 11, which is developed by the Danish Institute, Hydraulic Danish Institute. And this model is actually try to simulate floods in rivers. And this is a picture on top here, just shows this cross-section of a river, and it's full of water. And you have these banks on the other side. And if I look to the longitudinal profile of the river, so this is the water coming along this direction, and this is the bottom of the river. And then the governing equations that try to describe the motion of water in this river are two main equations. The first one called the conservation of mass, or that the water, I mean, has to be conservative during his motion in the river. And also I have another equation which is called the momentum equation, which it's like Newton's second law of motion, but for water. So this is as simple as that. So all these terms here try to describe the velocity of the water, the depth. So like here, I don't know with the mouse, but this is U is the velocity of the water, H is the water depth, and of course G acceleration due to gravity. Q is the discharge coming through the river, and S0, SF are just the slopes of the river and the friction slope. So these are items has to be built or used in any software to try to make a flooding in one-dimensional. But in urban areas, flow is not going only in one direction. It goes in two directions. So because we have the buildings, the streets, so the water goes through the streets and between the buildings. So then you have to deal with a more complex equation system. So you have to deal with a two-dimensional version of these equations. So we have also still an equation of continuity or conservation of mass or conservation of water. We have to put it in this way. And also we have two momentum equation or in two directions, because this has to do, we have to deal with two components, one in X and Y, which are the planar coordinates of the system. So of course it's getting more complicated. So we have to solve this system in software by using softwares and computers. So people try to simplify this equation a little bit to be able to make it more easier for modeling. So what they did, they try to, this is the equation in one-dimensional again. So they try to simplify this one, and they use what's called diffusive wave model. So they try to neglect some terms here in the equation and try to simplify the equation to become in that form, which is called a diffusive wave equation. So the propagation of the flood will be diffusive type wave. So the proposed model which we are planning to do, we try to take the concept of diffusive wave model, but we try to solve it in a different way that the traditional people try to do it. And the way we try to solve it, we use this concept of random walk theory. And random walk theory just to try to describe a certain amount of water. If we have a certain amount of water, we try to describe this water by some particles. We divide this volume of water into particles. So these particles has to go through the system and govern it by some formula or by some equations until they spread all over the area. And then we can define how much water is located in some areas. So the idea of doing this that we try to make this very complex system of equations, which is the traditional way, by only one single equation like that. Although it looks still more complex, but it's a lot easier to solve than this whole system of equations. These are 3 equations here. And by the concept of this random walk, so these are how to solve the equation, the equation which we are talking about now, which is the simplification of the 3 big equations we have seen before. This will be the solution. The solution will be explicit and ready you can use. So this is only try to specify where is the location of the particle at certain time. So if you have a couple of particles, and these particles are moving through the system, so you can trace them until they reach certain location. So in our modeling technique, so we need to know how much water we are going to model and to use to distribute it through the streets and the area which has been exposed to flood. So how we do that, we have to do some kind of hydrological modeling step. And the hydrological modeling step is try to get at the end what we call it flood hydrograph, or this shape, which is actually the flow rate in the vertical x, and we have the time in the horizontal x, and try to show this is the flood hydrograph, or what we call it the flood wave, which is coming to the certain area. So this is actually the general framework which we follow to solve the problem with our technique. Which first we have to make an extraction of the wadi, which was affecting the area, and we have the wadi is called Wadi Kos, which is a wadi in the eastern part of Jeddah, which really this wadi was the main cause of the event. And this wadi has been, we call it extracted, that we have to get this wadi shape by some software called WMS software. And then we try to identify land use and land cover in the area using satellite images, and then formulating this data in GIS format. And also we use some softwares like SMADA and HMS to do rainfall analysis. And at the end, we try to use these results from all these steps up here, and then we can start our modeling at that stage, our proposed model to get the flooding in the urban area. So after that, we superimpose this flooding on some kind of satellite images to see where is the location of the flooded area. So this is our study area. So this is, I just focused on this part of the area. And actually this point here is the outlet of the wadi I mentioned to you, Wadi Kos, and this is the catchment area of that wadi, which is this described by these streams are the streams within the wadi, and this is the outlet here, which actually this outlet. And the wadi, the water comes from this wadi and goes through here until it arrives to the city, and then starts spreading through the city. So we have to do this land use, land cover analysis of the wadi to see what's the soil type and also the residential areas, to be able to extract a certain important parameter, which we call it curve number, to be able to do the flooding calculations later on. And actually from rainfall point of view, this was the storm that happens. Actually, from the satellite images, we get the storm distribution over Jeddah, and this is from a site called G Wadi, and this site is try to get you all the data are stored by satellite measurements. So that you have a satellite orbiting the Earth, and they are trying to make images of all the rainfall over the globe, and they store all this data in the satellite, and you can access it and you get it. So we did the statistical analysis of that rainfall, of that event, and we found out that the rainfall was corresponding to, this is the rainfall event was about 70 millimeters, and this 70 millimeters was correspond to a return period of 10 years, which means that this is the rainfall that can repeat every every 10 years somehow. So it's not really a severe storm, but it causes really much damage here in Jeddah. And after we get this rainfall analysis, we have to get the flood. We need to know how much water comes from this rainfall. And this is by using this HMS program, we can transfer this rainfall into a flood hydrograph, into a water that comes into the ground. After that, this is our urbanized area, which we are going to simulate the urban flooding through it. So we have to digitize the houses and to know where is the houses in the area. So actually, we try to get this data from some sources, but unfortunately, we were not able to get them. There was security, and we cannot provide you with all this data. So we had to work ourselves with really using a kind of parsimonious approach to try to solve the problem. So we had to use the Google Earth satellite images and try to get the data from there and digitize the image, the area, to be able to use it in our modeling. So actually, this is the flood goes through this system. Comes from here. The flood comes from here and goes through this channel. Actually, this is not a channel. This is just a street, and it goes through the streets because the streets are becoming open channel, and the water is just flowing through them, and then until it reaches the highway, and it passes the highway and enters the university campus. So this is before the flood, and this is the image after the flood. So these are just images to show you some places before and after the flood, how the flood, covered all these areas from satellite images. And even this is our picture of some places. We have visited some places, and the water level was about like in this picture, it was about 1.5 meters. The water level was going at that top level here. So it also eroded areas, and you can see these images of all the crashes of the cars and these type of things. So when we did our simulation modeling, so this is our model results. So the flood started from here, and it propagates through the system. So after half an hour, after 1.5 hour, and this is after 4.5 hour. So you can see the spreading of the water in the areas, and the black spots are just the houses which we considered in the model. So we didn't consider all the houses, by the way, because also of the computer capabilities. So we had to work only with some little houses, but we still, as I mentioned, this is a preliminary results. So we're still working on that, try to improve that results. But you can see at the bottom one here, because of the highway, so water started to move up to this direction, and some passes and crosses the road and goes through the campus. But we didn't continue the simulation further on. So this was the visual just comparison between the flooded area, and this is what we got from our model, but as I told, it's just in the preliminary version of the model. So our conclusion that a model has been proposed for flood simulation in urban areas. The model is based on a simplified version of Saint-Venant equations, diffusive wave model in 2 dimensions, and solved by the random walk theory. The model is suitable to show the flooding of initially dry areas, which really this is important because other available models, when they have dry areas in the beginning and you run the model, you really go to unstable results. The model is in its early stage and it cannot reproduce the details of the flow structure. Still, we need to improve a lot of things there. And compared to numerical schemes, it has advantages that is efficient in terms of computer costs. Thank you.
Shukran, Professor Amro. I think this is really sophisticated information what you give to us. And I'll take the floor for everybody needs any question. Yes, please. Can I get the microphone?
thank you, Professor. Very interesting presentation, interesting analysis. And I have a technical question that may be based on only partial understanding of what you're doing there. But as I understand your hydrodynamic model, your first step was to simplify the model using a diffusion approach. And then, if I understand the random walk solution approach, that's basically a numerical way of solving the model. And what I'm wondering is, you know, often we use simplification in order to maintain a continuous solution. But in this case, since you're going to a numerical solution anyway, I wondered how much that gained and whether you would not, an alternative would be to use a numerical solution of the original more complicated model. And would that really be a lot more computationally intensive?
Thank you for your interesting question. Actually, first, of course, I know that I went quickly through this because I thought also that might be people not so deeply interested in the details of the model. But in principle, actually, of course, if you want to solve the full dynamic equation of central equation in two-dimensional, is really tedious. But I know that, I mean, there are softwares now available. They can do that. Like, for instance, Mike 21 in the Biodange Institute, they have that complete system of equations solved there. And actually, we were trying also to use that one, but we went to some difficulties about the data actually. So even we were suffering about getting the data because we need to get the topography of the city and ground survey. We need to make a ground survey of the streets and buildings, and all these details has to become in the model, which of course is huge of data. And if you try to run the model on, if you have all the details and you have the model ready, if even you want to run it there, it will take a lot of time, and also, I mean, it runs in some instabilities actually because of the, we didn't do that on that specific area, but we used actually, like for instance, if you are familiar with Lكرسي, it's also a kind of a flow dynamic model which is available by US Corpus of Engineers. It's a free domain. You can, we try to use it in dry areas here in wadis, and we get stuck with, even in one-dimensional case, we get stuck with instabilities. So that's why we said, okay, if we even go in two-dimensional, we still have the same problems with, even if the one-dimensional doesn't work. So I think even two-dimensional will be even more complicated, and maybe it doesn't even work at all. So what we try to do then, we said, okay, let's take a simplified version of the central equation, which is the diffusive type wave, and start from that one, and try to, because actually in one-dimensional case, people did diffusive wave techniques for solving the flow system, and it was successful, I mean, in some sense. So we said, why we don't use it, but in two-dimensional now. We try to do it in two-dimensional. People did it in one-dimensional, the diffusive wave type of thing. We try to do it now in two-dimensional. But we even said, okay, don't solve it in the traditional way by finite difference, for instance, of finite element, but look at another technique which people used to have it in the groundwater. Groundwater people work with that. So groundwater people, when they solve the diffusive wave equations, they always use random walk because it is more accurate and more stable, and it has really a lot of nice features. So, and also because also of my background, I'm also from the groundwater people. So I said, let's try to transfer the knowledge from the groundwater people to surface water people. So let's do the same technique, random walk technique, and implement it for solving the same equation. Although, of course, the parameters between groundwater, diffusivity, and all these types of things is completely different. So we have to get the right values for these parameters. So that's so it was really still, I mean, an idea in the beginning, and we still try to see if it's going to be, good or produce nice results. But it was in the beginning, it was promising in some sense.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Is any other question? تفضل.
عذرا ممكن طبعا نوجه سؤالي باللغه العربيه اذا بامكانيه. اول حاجه اتقدم بالشكر جزيل لسعاده البروفيسور على هذه المحاضره الجميله القيمه. دائما عندنا لاي مخطط هناك عوائق. مثلا عندنا الان عشان نحسب حساب مثلا جريان تدفق المياه، طبعا المعادله الحسابيه حتكون يعني دائما على شيء نموذجي، لكن الغالب كلنا نعرف وممكن تعرف سعاده البروفيسور انه الاوديه عندنا هناك ترتكز على العديد من العوائق للاسف، انه هناك يعني حفر، هناك مخلفات ترمى، هناك عقوم تضاف، كل هذه تاثر على اي معادله حسابيه وبنفس الوقت تغير من مجاري الاوديه. بالتالي طبعا كان من ضمن الحلول ان انشاء 5 سدود في منطقه شرق جده، وهذا طبعا كان حل جذري وجميل ومطلوب وهو اساسي، ولكن للاسف انه بنيت السدود داخل احياء وضمنت السدود الكاتشمنت اريا حقها اللي هي وجود مباني عاليه بارتفاعات عاليه داخل احواض السدود. بالتالي الان اصبحنا الان نعالج مشكله، ولكنه ايضا وصلنا اوجدنا مشكله للناس اللي ساكنين ضمن هذه المباني. الحلول اللي عملت للاسف انه لم تاخذ الجديه من كافه الجهات، وهذا طبعا هذا ليس بعذر ولا يجب ان يكون هناك اي استهانه بمثل هذا الامور، لانها ترتبط بارتباط حياه بشر متواجدين ضمن هذه المباني اللي موجوده داخل السدود. السؤال بالاضافه لانه الان طريق الحرمين عامل فاصل ما بين شرق وغرب جده، بنفس الوقت عائق بارتفاع يزيد عن 3 امتار في بعض المواقع و5 امتار على الاحياء اللي هي طبعا موازيها. عدم وجود عبارات على هذا الطريق يسبب اشكاليه ثانيه، بحيث انه يكون هناك ارتداد لمياه الامطار في بعض المواقع التي لم تصلها سدود، بنفس الوقت اللي هي لم تشملها عمليه توجيه المياه. انا بس اتمنى انه تكون في ملاحظه واوجه سؤالي لك انه بحيث يكون في تعليق الى الكرنت وما هي الحلول التي ممكن تعالج مثل هذه الاشكاليه. شكرا لك.
شكرا لك يا دكتور على السؤال، وده من الموضوعات فعلا الهامه، واحنا مشغولين دايما في القسم عندنا في قسم الهيدرولوجي بالامور هذه، وبنحاول نفكر يعني دايما في ازاي نوجد حلول للامور دي كلها. فبالنسبه طبعا حضرتك الموضوع الاول او حضرتك الموضوع فيه كذا نقطه، ومنها الموضوع الاول الاوديه وان فيها يعني ما هي فيها تعرجات كثيره وفيها اشياء كثيره. طبعا التفاصيل بتاع الوادي ده لازم بناخده في الاعتبار على اساس ان احنا ندخله داخل الموديل، فبالتالي يعني التنبؤات اللي بتطلع معانا بتبقى واخده في اعتبارها شكل التفاصيل بتاعه القاع بتاع الوادي او تفاصيل هذا الوادي معانا في الدراسه. لكن الدقه بتاعته هي المشكله، الدقه بتاعته هي اللي بتبقى عندنا مشكله، الدقه بتاعته اللي احنا بنحصل عليها احنا بنتعامل دايما مع اللي هي بيسموها نماذج الارتفاعات الرقميه. نماذج الارتفاعات الرقميه ديت اللي متوفره مجانيه طبعا بتبقى دقتها الى حد ما هياش عاليه، زي مثلا في نماذج الارتفاعات الرقميه تبع وكاله ناسا عاملاها على مستوى العالم كله بدقه 90 متر الخليه بتاعتها، وفي دقه 30 متر، لكن اقل من كده مفيش. فده بنعاني منه. احنا كنا عايزين في الدراسه دقه اكتر من كده، بس للاسف ما قدرناش نحصلها او مبالغها غاليه جدا، وتواصلنا مع بعض الجهات وعشان نقدر ان احنا نجيب الداتا دهيت. الجهات دي لم يعني ما نقدرش ان انتوا توفروا لنا هذه الداتا، فاضطرينا نشتغل باللي موجود زي ما بيقولوا. فده كان بالنسبه للجزئيه بتاعت الايه التفاصيل بتاع الوادي وان في هذه الاشياء وازاي بنتعامل معاها، فده كله بيؤخذ في الاعتبار. الشيء الثاني حضرتك بالنسبه لموضوع السدود والمشاكل اللي حصلت في سد ام الخير سنه 2011، انا طبعا لم اتطرق اليها في هذا الموضوع، ولكن احنا برضه شغالين فيها عشان في بحث يعني في هذا الموضوع. القصه طبعا مشكلتها اساسا موضوع الاربانيزيشن، موضوع ان دلوقتي الناس كلها بدات كانت بتعمل مساكن في حوض الوادي نفسه، يعني حوض سد ام الخير اساسا الناس بدات في داخل الحوض، فطبعا لما جه الفلات اللي حصل في 2011 جه طبعا في مدى البحيره بتاعت حوض البيوت موجوده، مفيش امكانيه لترشح الميه لبطن الارض، الوادي بقى كله اسفلت، فبالتالي سبب الكارثه بالشكل اللي حصل ده. والسد طبعا ما استحملش الميه اللي جايه، حصل له انهيار. فطبعا يعني المفروض يعني ده من الامور المتعارف عليها ان المفروض يكون في حرم للسد، حوض كده المفروض يمنع انه ينشا فيه اي مباني او اي اشياء، يعني لازم يبقى في منطقه معينه كده حوض السد معروفه، هذه المنطقه ممنوع ان يبنى فيها. فده كان من المشاكل اللي سببت
Professor Amr, thank you very much. I think then there is no more question. Up and down. Okay. Now we're going for the last speaker for this session. It's not the least, but it's the last in our session before the prayer and lunch break. It's Professor Gu Shenku. He will talk about analyzing the recent earthquake catastrophe in China and capacity building of disaster preparedness in developing country. Professor Gu is Deputy Director of S&T Committee of National Earthquake Response Support Services in China, and he's also Deputy General Team Leader of the China International Search and Rescue Team, and also he is a Director of the Digital Disaster Mitigation and Emergency Management Rescue Center, and also in the King University, and also he is the Vice President of the International Emergency Management Society. Professor Gu Shenku, floor is for you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks a lot for giving my opportunity to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. My topic is analysis on the recent earthquake catastrophe in China and capacity building of disaster preparedness in developing countries. So just introduced by Chairman, I'm the Vice President of Teams and also the Deputy General Team Leader of China, of CISA. So here is I just give some outlines, here background and comprehensive analysis, and also the list here. So the first, I would like to introduce the Asia Pacific and Middle East area located in the area of the surrounding Pacific seismic belt and the Himalaya mountains. And there are many earthquake disasters occurred in the developing countries in recent years, and the Middle East and the Northern Africa area are part of them. And since this century, there are about 10 times earthquake occur in this seismic belt, from the India, Gujarat earthquake, and also the Algeria, and also other countries. And in 2008, a big earthquake occurred in China, the Wuhan earthquake. And also just introduced by our President, Howard Drager. And here's the global seismic belt maps. And here we can see the Arab block. And there are many of the earthquakes surrounding this block. And also here's the seismic risk map of the world. And here we can see in the northern part of the Arab block, and also the MENA area, there are many high risk area of the earthquake. And also here shows the map of China, and 70% of the mainland of China has countered by the earthquake. And also here we think I will show you the comparative analysis on the causes of casualty in recent earthquake. So in recent years, there are many earthquakes occurred in the east boundary of the Tibet in China, and you can see many cycles, and you can see the earthquake. And so here is you can see the 4 earthquakes. One is Yushu earthquake in 2010, and also the Lushan earthquake in 2013. So there's 7. The magnitude is 7. So it's a very similar earthquake, but the casualties is different. So and here is about the death toll is 2,698, and here is only about 200, and here is the magnitude about 6.5, but also they're very different. What's the reason for this difference? So and here is the destructions of the earthquake in Yushu earthquake. So and here is we take the photo in the on-site, and we can see whole of the buildings collapsed here, and also here is another earthquake. The buildings types are different, so the death tolls are light, they are small. And also last year we have another big earthquake. The magnitude is about 6.5, but the casualty is the death toll is 617. So the whole of the buildings with the man-made buildings in the countryside collapsed. So it's caused, and also the many landslides in the mountain area. So that's caused the big death toll. And another earthquake occurred in Yunnan province, but the magnitude is the same, but the death toll is only one person. So there's the difference in because the structures here as wood-made structures here, but here is mud-made structure. It's a different. After the earthquake, after 30 minutes to half hour, the mud-made house will be collapsed, and the peoples will be dead because of there are no space in the collapsed building. And so here's many landslides occur in the mountain area, and here's the rescue period in the mountains. So and it has found that the main reasons of mass casualties of Yushu earthquake, Ludian earthquake, and other earthquakes is caused by huge building collapse of local simple mud-made house located in deep mountain areas in China. And also there are the landslide where the certain rescue teams, the golden time we lost, and there are only 50 minutes to 2 hours. It will be the big problems for this area if the strong earthquake occur. There are no more time for saving life for local people and provincial user teams and the government. When they arriving at the disaster site, it's too late because the many countryside road is cut off by the landslide. So and here we concluded several cycles for the response to catastrophe. So here is the period of emergency response, and first the preparedness, and also the emergency response, and emergency search and rescue, and then the recovery. So here's the third part is capacity building and the resilience of emergency preparedness. So and here we know in China and other developing countries, there are some capacity buildings, and normally we have integrated risk assessment and risk mapping in the urban and rural area, and also we have many methodologies to make a prevention and decision-making system if the disasters occur, and also the response for the bigger disaster. and also the coordination mechanism and the regulation and the laws on the emergency issues and management. So there are many NEMAs and LEMAs and also the AOC and other systems to coordinate, to make decision making for the on-site professional user teams and on-site coordination. So and here we know from the national level to professional level, and finally as the town level and the community level. So this community level is very important for each countries to improve very quickly of the resiliency capacities. And also for the user teams, depends on the Israel guideline. We have a heavy team and a media team, and also a light team and the user first responders. So for the community level and the village level as the user first responders, it's very useful for the local people and the local government. So and here we know in the first day there's a very high efficiency period for the life safe, and also for the second and third day as a middle effective period. And then after the 72 hours for the concrete buildings, that will be a lower effective period for saving life. So and here we think for the survival rates, and if we know the time and when the user teams will be arrived, and we can mobilize the whole of the user teams and efficiently to cover the disaster area. So if in the half hour we will save more survivals. But if we arrive too late, that will be many survivals, many people buried in the collapsed building will be dying. So that's the diagram shows the survival rate and the rescue rate. And also we know we have several conclusions about to make the integrated risk assessment first, and risk mapping, and then the prevention, and then the preparedness, and then the contingency plan. So and the four is for the emergency response and capacity building. So and in China we have several steps. Before 2003, we haven't established the emergency system in China. And after 2003, we have a big event, the SARS in China. And then that's the first stage in China. We established the emergency management agencies and also the computing and the decision-making system. And after 2008 of Wenchang earthquake, user teams was very developed in China. Up to now, we have about 4,000 user teams in China, and developed very quickly. And also we have several we have trainings program, and also for the first responders trainings cooperated with THW and other countries. So that's very useful for the community level. So and in 2009, China International Search and Rescue Team was the first time to pass the ISRAC external classification. So we become a heavy team. And in last year we have a reclassification, and we passed and become a heavy team. We are the second heavy team in Asia area, and also we comprehensive analysis on emergency response, and we know there's after strong earthquake occur, normally it is very difficult to get disaster information. So the information very quickly and efficient collection is very important, and then to transmission, and then to make a decision making. So Sahana will be very important to sharing for the NGO organizations, and the VC OSAC is especially sharing for the countries who have USA teams. And so that's after the big earthquake, we have several hours, and we must very quickly to organize the information and how to make decision making. So, and here is a diagram of our CISA teams. We created in 2005, and then we have a standard operation procedures. If the big earthquake occurred in the world, was start up step by step, and in the national level. And then we divided three types. One is the blue type. There's big earthquake, but no response. And the second type is intermediate response. The disasters maybe occur, but they didn't need more user teams to support for them. But the red one, the third part, is advanced response. So, and maybe many user teams from the world will be organized by your OCHA, and then to mobilize to the disaster area. So the fifth part is how to operation in the models of the decentralized OSAC. So here is some diagrams, your OCHA with OSAC and ANDAC members, and here the RDC and OSAC and Lima, and how to transmit the information. And also the Sahana is just the support part for the NGO and how to coordinate and sharing the information. And also in the recent years, there are new concepts to suggest the models of multi-sub and decentralized OSAC for user teams. So we can use these conceptions with the Sahana and also the user teams. So we in a catastrophe on-site coordinations. So we can use these models and from the tops of the international level to the national level and then to the regional. And we have different levels of on-site, sub-on-site operational coordination center. So here is some the results that many such cases shows the first responders are the main efficient on-site search and rescue powers, and also the real-time early warning and emergency evacuation before disasters, on-site emergency and efficient organization of such operation coordination during disaster is key for huge mass disaster mitigation and emergencies. So, and here's from the 11 March of Japan, it's the early warning system. And then we have some instruments to get the information very quickly. And also in very early, in a very bad conditions, so we can get the information. For example, if the communication is broke off, and also there are no electricity, how to get the information very quickly. And also to the EOCs and others, and then on-site commanding system here, and all weather disaster information collection, transmission and decision-making system. So, and here is some high-tech using emergency management and also such operation. So normally during the big earthquake, the bridge will be cut down, and also the highway and the road will be cut down by the landslide or cut down by the bridge. So and in recent years, we organized a new organization in the beneath under the International Emergency Management Society. So we call it the Emergency Industry Islands. So up to now, we have about 60 emergency industry companies involved in this island. So here we show some equipment, how to use if the big earthquake occur, doing the on-site very quickly to make the bridge And also very quickly to pass the very damaged and very difficult the road, highway, and also in the waters and in the land to use them, and also the capacity for climbing the slope and other trucks here. And also emergency supplies trucks for emergency electric power, emergency communication, and also here emergency for trucks for drawing water. If you have floodings and you have waters, cities with the flooding, so and then you can very quickly to draw these waters with big trucks here. And also the conclusions and discussions. So there are many disasters occur in Asia Pacific and the Middle East area, but most of the huge catastrophes were happening in developing countries in recent years because they have poor conditions and poor capability to countermeasure the disaster. So the analysis shows the same events of natural disaster occurred both in the developing and the developed countries. The disaster degree and the casualties are different. So the main reasons for the small events, but with big disasters in the third world countries, are the lower resiliences and no disaster preparedness with a poor living condition. By the cases analysis, so we discuss on the comparative analysis on the causes of casualties, capacity building, and the resiliency of emergency preparedness, emergency response, and capacity buildings of user teams. So and the user teams operations and models of multi, sub, and decentralized OSI. So it's I think it's very useful for the future's disaster response. So thanks a lot for your attention.
Have any question? Professor Koshenko, thank you very much. It's really very interesting words, and really, I mean, the pictures what was shown, it's really sometimes scary a little bit, but it's okay. Okay, now I open the floor for question. There is any question over there, please? There is a question up there? No? Good. So we have here.
Thank you very much, Professor Krsy. Very nice presentation, and good to know about the Chinese earthquake preparedness system. I just wanted to see that the main cause of the casualty was the structural failure of the buildings and also the wooden house and other things. So every time the same scenario we're seeing, like the pictures. So I want to know about the local level preparedness. Is there anything like the community-based preparedness? For example, this type of structure is vulnerable for earthquake. So they are changing their structure, they are changing their design. So what is the communication between the local level, local people and the local administration to change this practice? Thank you.
So in recent years in China, we have a pilot project, especially for the local buildings. So in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region, we have a new building code for the local residents. So and we give a new design of structure. And normally in China, you know, we have a very completely different. In the urban area, we have a very the national building code standard, and we must if we construct the buildings, we must based on this regulation. But in the countryside, depends on the traditional customs. There are no special building code for the earthquake. So in recent years, we depends on the pilot project. Now we have about 10 provinces make this project. So and also in the many mountain areas, we ask the local people, local government, and the local residents, when they build new buildings, they have new structures to, especially to for the local residents to make the high level prevention of the disaster, earthquake disaster. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? If there is no other questions, so I will thank all our distinguished speakers today with this very interesting and scary sometimes information, what is really so. And we'll see you inshallah in second session. We will start, I don't know, we're going to start as it's here 2:30, or we'll get more to 3.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody. إذا سمحتوا نيابة عن الكلية سعادة الدكتور إبراهيم جمعة يقدم الدروع للضيوف إذا سمحت لنا. الله تفضل سعادة الدكتور. فين الدروع حضرتك؟ الله يحييكم جميعا على الغداء باذن الله، وبعد ساعه الساعه 2:30 حتبدا الجلسه اللي بعدها باذن الله، فنتشرف انه يعني تشاركونا طعام الغداء، وان شاء الله الساعه 2:30 تبدا الجلسه. شكرا جزيلا.